Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Z Talks with your host, Zaria Musgrove, where I talk about books, movies, TV shows, places, and things that relate to history and classic literature. Now, today I will be talking about my recent trip to Scotland, but more specifically, Glasgow, because funnily enough, as much as people told me that when I went to Scotland, I would prefer Edinburgh, I actually prefer Glasgow, which might come as a shock to people because Edinburgh, don't get me wrong, insanely beautiful city. There are literally cliffs and castles everywhere you look, and it's breathtaking. But Glasgow is, to me, as an outsider looking in, the heart and soul of Scottish culture, at least from what I experienced. All of the culture in Scotland is in Glasgow. I absolutely fell in love with the city. And if I had the opportunity to go back to Scotland, I would be in Glasgow. So I will be talking about my trip, the culture, and the history that I encountered, and just interesting, fun facts about Glasgow specifically. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, when I went to Glasgow, I absolutely fell in love with the city, mainly because I think that the history and the culture and just the overall vibe of Glasgow encapsulates everything that I imagined Scotland would be when I went there. Don't get me wrong, Edinburgh is a beautiful city. Like, literally everywhere you look, there's a rolling hill, there's a castle, the architecture is insane. It kind of blows you away with how beautiful it is. But Glasgow just has something that I can't explain. Just the everywhere you look in Glasgow, the culture, you feel it from the food, the people, the drinks, just the vibe feels very Scottish. And for me, one thing that shocked me about this feeling of Scottish culture is how closely related it is to Irish culture. And I couldn't understand why, when I was going around Glasgow, I kept on seeing Irish pubs everywhere and just keep on seeing a lot of the cultural markers that you would envision in your head that are associated with Ireland in Scotland. But I understood this when I went to the museum in Edinburgh. That's the one thing going for Edinburgh. They have an amazing museum, and I absolutely loved it. And in this museum, they talked about how Ireland and Scotland have a historic relationship. The two countries have always had close historical and cultural ties because it was quite common for people from Ireland to migrate to Scotland to work in the lowland farms. They would just work as farmers and laborers, and this common migration flow between the two countries kind of led to a fusion of cultures, and this was solidified in the time of the famine, the big famine that happened in Ireland, where the potato crop failed in 1845. Well, it started failing in 1845 and it lasted for quite some years, which led to a mass exodus of people from Ireland. And one of the main countries that they went to when they left Ireland was Scotland. So, this, you can see how people coming from Ireland to Scotland, the cultures would fuse, and you have a lot of things that you would think, oh, is this an Irish thing? Well, yes and no. It's been there so long that it kind of is a bit of a Scottish thing now. So that is one thing that really shocked me about going there. Feeling the Scottish culture, but also hearing the echoes of Ireland with it, but also seeing the differences between the two of them. Because there are a lot of fusions of other cultures in Scottish culture as well, coming from one other country, which totally threw me for a left field, which is Japan. Stay with me while I explain why Japan has an influence on the culture, specifically in Glasgow. I would say Scotland is large, but Glasgow specifically and Japan, the culture influences there. So, to explain this, we have to start with the glory days of Scotland. So, in the Victorian era, between the years of 1837 and 1901, Glasgow was a big deal. A lot of people are looking at Edinburgh now and they're like, Edinburgh's a big deal. But back in the day, Glasgow was that girl. Glasgow was known during the Victorian era as the second seat of the empire, the second city of the empire, because Glasgow was buzzing, a buzzing city. It was bustling and it was the hub of industrial advancement. It had a lot of steel industries and shipbuilding. That was one of the main industries in Glasgow. It produced a fifth of the world's ships globally at one point. A fifth of the world's ships came from Glasgow at one point. It was the leading city in industrial advancement and was considered to be on the cutting edge of technology, specifically in transport, which is where Japan comes in. Because when the UK government was thinking, which city should we use to do a culture for industry exchange program? Of course, they thought of Glasgow because Glasgow was literally making trains and trams on the underground and on the overground that were on the cutting edge that other countries weren't doing it like Glasgow was doing it. So when Japan came knocking and was like, we want technology for transport, they did an art for industry exchange program with the city of Glasgow, which makes a lot of sense now because when I was in the museum in Glasgow, I kept on seeing Japanese things like kimonos and um, samurai samurai swords, samurai warrior breastplates, and armor. I kept on seeing all of these things that are synonymous with Japanese culture, and I could clearly tell came from Japan. And I was like, why is there so much things from Japan in a museum in Glasgow? And this is because that came from that exchange for art from industry programs. So Glasgow gave Japan cutting edge industry equipment, cutting edge technologies, and just people to exchange ideas with. And in return, they got art, which filled their museums. And that explains why there is so much Japanese things in their museums. And an additional thing, it explains why the leading artists in Glasgow used a lot of Japanese styles in their paintings because there was a section of the museum where you could see famous paintings from this famous art group called the Glasgow Boys, which were really popular in the late 1880s to like 1910s. There were a group of 20 guys that called themselves the Glasgow Boys, and they were kind of on the cutting edge and pushing the boundaries of art and kind of putting the seed of art back into Glasgow because at that time art was mainly emanating from Edinburgh and it was kind of a posh bourgeoisie style, but the people, these Glasgow boys, they changed the subject matter of Scottish art to looking at actual people and Scottish hills and farms and changing the Scottish matter to the subject matter to everyday things that you would see in Scotland as opposed to the topics of art pieces that were coming from Edinburgh, which wasn't really tapped into the everyday life of people in Scotland. So they pushed this new style of art, the Glasgow Boys, and they became really popular internationally because they use French style in their art. And another style that made them even more popular, which is where Japan comes in again, is the Japanese style of art. Later on in the years, they went to Japan. Well, two of the Glasgow Boys out of the 20 went to Japan in 1894. And this trip kind of influenced their art and changed and pushed their style to the type of art that wasn't really coming out of Scotland at the time. And I found it quite beautiful looking at the museum and seeing this kind of fusion. I found really interesting. And you can just see how all these different countries have influence on this Glasgow culture specifically, because I can't say the same for Edinburgh. I went to Edinburgh and I didn't see the same influences of Japan. You could see the same influences of Ireland, but not of Japan. I think that's something that's very Glasgow specific, which I think is something that's also very unique. So, yeah, Japan and Glasgow, they were like this. And that for me is something that threw me for left fields that I don't think a lot of people know, but should know, which should prompt you to go to the museum in Glasgow, if anything. But yeah, I love Glasgow. And those are all of the fun facts and things that I learned in my Glasgow trip. And yeah, that's all I have to say. This is a short episode because Glasgow was a short trip. I only went there for 3 days, but I can't stop yapping about it because I absolutely love the city and I highly recommend you to go to the city. Oh, one last thing before I head. I got this book, Rob Roy, from Edinburgh. So not Glasgow related, but still Scottish related because I'm starting a trend now where every country I go to, I'm trying to get a book there. So this was my Scotland purchase. So I'm really excited to read this. Not now. I'm not going to read it now because currently I'm reading 100 Years of Solitude, which is really good, which I know would be because obviously it's one of the best top rated books. You keep on seeing it on top 100 books of all time, so I know it was going to be good. But I just love when I read a book that's top rated and it actually is good. So I'm really enjoying that. So I will read this at some point, but not now. It will be an eventual read. But when I do read it, I will let you know, and I'll probably do an episode on it so we can revisit Scottish culture in more depth at a later date because this is supposed to be a folk story about a folk hero that kind of looks at the revolutionary times, which will be interesting to learn about because having touched upon Scottish culture briefly through Glasgow, I'm really interested to learn about the history of Scotland as a whole, not just one specific city. So yeah, that is all I have to say today about my trip to Scotland and Glasgow. Highly recommend the city. It's it's just a fun time. The people are amazing. And yeah, if you want to hear about some of my other travels, you can watch some previous episodes. I do have some travel episodes in there. If not, you can watch some of my previous episodes on books or movies or TV shows that are not travel related. But if not, I'm also doing an episode in the next 2 weeks. So you can just tune back in on the platform of your choice in another couple weeks on Sea Talks.